Howdy, folks. Welcome to the podcast Iron. My name is Laura Mullen Vermilia, and on this podcast, I interview members of the cast iron art community in order to inspire, educate, and spread ideas about iron casting and cast iron art. Our guest today is Marjee Levine. During this episode, she walks us through the tale of how she got started in iron casting and shares why she feels so passionate about serving our community in any way she can. Marjee, thank you so much for giving me your time and letting me grill you about your past. Please know that your dedication to proliferating this material's knowledge and this community is inspiring to us all. Now, for all of you listening or watching, thanks so much for tuning in, and please enjoy. Welcome, Marjee Levine. Thank you so much for joining us today. And let's just start off with, well, who the hell are you anyways?
Okay, so before I answer that question, I'm going on record to say what an awesome thing this is that you're doing. This is 100% up my alley as far as recording and archiving and cataloging the stories and voices, and that some of which are not going to be around much longer.
Yeah.
Of our community, and it's really important. And kudos for you kudos to you for stepping up and doing that. It's really, really amazing project. So thank you for having me and doing this.
I'm honored that you're seeing me and it means a lot that you just said all of that, especially at the beginning. So thank you so much.
I mean, that's my, I try at all times to be of service to our community, and what you're doing is a huge service. So thank you for doing it.
Thank you.
Now I'll introduce myself.
Yes, please do.
I'm Marjee Levine. I'm an artist that has wholly been transformed by using iron. I'm a technician and an educator and a mentor and an advocate. That's all the professional side. And then as a human, because this will be important, I'm a 5 foot tall girl, including the Birkenstocks. Some descriptors that I've accepted over the years would be bitch, control freak, perfectionist, what else? Feminist, Bostonian, born and raised, and I live at the beach with my dog. So that's me.
So did you know I'm originally from Massachusetts?
I think we discussed this.
Like, yeah, but just like in passing sort of. But yeah, there's nothing like Massachusetts in the summer.
It's, it really, I love all 4 seasons, honestly, but by the end of winter, I am done with winter.
Yeah.
And so days, like, it is picture perfect out today. It's like 70 and sunny and gorgeous. And I can smell the ocean because I'm like a block away.
Yeah.
And that's just good for my soul. So
I was there last weekend for Memorial Day with my mom. So it was a nice holiday, and I do miss it. So we just kind of want to start at the beginning. Any childhood predispositions to, I kind of start off with like any childhood predispositions to manual labor, because we're so steeped in that in the iron casting world. And so I like to try and figure out if, the people that I'm having as guests on the show, if they kind of had manual strengths in their childhood.
So manual labor, no. I didn't grow up with parents that built things or fixed things. My dad knew how to fix anything, and he would make a phone call, right? That was the solution, is to call somebody. But art, yes, and fire, right? So I was the kid that melted McDonald's Happy Meal toys with my parents' lighters, and got the summer camp fine for building a bonfire that could be seen from the public road.
Wow.
And, things of that nature. But really it was, it was art that was always a constant. So from before I can remember, I have wanted to be an artist when I grew up. evident by my mom kept this baby book for me before I was I was the oldest child, so that stopped quickly when my sister was born. But there was one day, so my sister was born when I was 3.5, so I was less than 3. Um, and I guess my mom was writing that she asked me that day what I wanted to be when I grew up. And in order, I said artist, teacher, veterinarian.
Oh.
And that has held pretty true, right? I mean, I am an artist and I am a teacher and I like animals more than I like people. So there you go. So I was behind on the manual labor, right? Like that was something that
Mm-hmm.
I was athletic. Um, like I think it was like a state law that you had to play soccer growing up here in Massachusetts.
Yeah. I also played soccer in Massachusetts growing up, so you're right.
It's requisite. So I was always really athletic and really tough,
Mm-hmm.
right? I was a tomboy, but I was not a tool user,
Okay.
and so I had to play catch up
When you got into school. Okay.
when I got to that point.
So out of elementary school, middle school, high school, were you taking art classes?
Yeah, so I went to public school, but we had a really good art program all the way through. So I always took art classes. I always took any opportunity to do, like the more creative version of a final project for a class.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was the kid that I was told I was too smart to go to art school, right? Like you're wasting your life
Oh,
kind of thing.
by your parents or by?
But no, by the school.
Oh,
Yeah. No, my parents were always really supportive, whatever,
good.
yeah, whatever we wanted to do. But it was always just clear that I was going to go to art school. There was nothing else I wanted to do.
Yeah.
It's what made me happy. The rest of it did not make me happy. It was pretty crappy. So, I was in these like, super fancy classes, like AP classes with the Harvard bound assholes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then there was me,
Yeah.
right? There's no reason to talk about K-12, honestly, but
Okay.
except to say that it was a given that I was going to go to art school,
Mm-hmm.
and so I did. I had a guidance counselor try to talk me out of it, saying that I should go to like a state school with a good art department,
Huh.
so that when I realized I was throwing my life away, I could switch my major.
That might have been what happened to me
Yeah,
because, well, and also there was the scholarship. I don't know of how much like standardized testing was a thing, but I tested certain whatever that standardized test that they had in Massachusetts. It was like if you got a certain score, you could go to any school in Massachusetts for tuition waived.
yeah.
You'd still have to pay room and board any school besides maybe Mass Art because it was an art school. Because we looked, my parents took me to RISD and Mass Art and like Maine College of Art and Design and all of that. But then in the end, UMass Dartmouth still had a pretty good art program. And so
Mhm.
that may have been exactly. I think my mom was also hoping I'd marry an engineer.
Well, there you go. I mean, I tell my students to marry well all the time because how else are you going to support yourself? Um, yeah, no, that was long after my time. Like the MCAS didn't exist.
Okay. And I think that's what it's been so long now. I can't even remember. But so you're going to go to art school.
Mhm.
And where did you go?
So I went to the Art Institute of Chicago.
I will be completely honest. I did know that. But some of the questions that I will ask you is for the listeners.
Yeah, people don't know that. Yeah. Yeah, it was the only place I applied. If I didn't get in, I wasn't going. Um, that's just how it was going to go.
Mm-hmm.
It was basically between that and RISD, but I wanted to be a plane ride away from home. I wanted to be gone.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted a change. So I did this crazy like early admission, nerve-wracking, horrible thing, but I got in and that was cool. And that's kind of when everything started.
So your freshman year sculpture class, do you know you're going into like, I guess, what was your intended concentration?
So I knew that I liked 3D. I can't draw or paint worth a crap. I mean, better than an average person, but in comparison to like people we know.
Same. I'm in the same boat with you. Definitely a three-dimensional, especially subtractive or whatever. So I'm in the same boat with you.
Yeah. So freshman year was freshman year. It's all of the freshman required courses, and that's miserable anywhere you go, pretty much.
It's foundational, we'll say that.
It's foundations. Yeah, you have to do it. The end of freshman year, I had applied to be an RA in the dorms for sophomore year. And they let us register really early because our schedules were going to be so crazy with like having duty shifts and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I registered before the grad students, which was crazy. So I went ahead and registered for beginning Foundry because I knew it was a really hard class to get into, although I didn't actually know what it was, to be fair.
Okay.
Someone said, "Oh yeah, it's like you melt metal." I was like, "Oh, okay. Sounds great."
I'm in. Yeah.
Yeah, totally in. So I was done with foundations, and so I think I can't remember what else I took, honestly, because it didn't matter because I took Foundry. We learned how to make a green sand mold in like a day, and then we were going to pour some metal, and I see this like glowing orb of enlightenment rising from the furnace, and that was pretty awesome.
What kind of metal were you pouring at that moment?
I think we were pouring aluminum. I think it was like a quick, I honestly don't remember.
Yeah. Just to whet their appetites, sort of a thing.
Yeah, it was, and I still do, and I actually do this now with my students too, is I'm going to pour on the first day of class because why not? Right.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, like we're here, and actually, COVID started that. So after it's a total tangent, but after we got shut down, March of 2020, I went back in person that September. We were given the option to go back in person. It was supposed to be hybrid. It wasn't. It was great. But I firmly believed that we were going to get shut down again. Right. Like I thought that our time was limited. And so I was like, well, we're here. We have access to the studio. We're going to pour metal. So we poured metal night one, which was cool.
Yeah.
But anyway, I don't think it was the first day at the Art Institute, but it was close. And that was like, like all of my, like love of fire just got like condensed into this crucible of glowing amazingness.
Yeah.
I also was really fortunate to have an amazing professor and continued mentor and friend, Carolyn Ottmers, who saved me, basically, right? I was not very happy with the Art Institute. I wasn't sure if I was in the right place. I wasn't sure if I should stay. And I didn't actually even tell her any of those things. I think, she's just a really intuitive person. And I don't think that she knows in retrospect because, we still talk, but
yeah.
So I don't even know if she knew exactly what was wrong, but she knew that there was this kid who was sitting, silently in the corner, which is not unusual for me. I'm actually really shy. And like she just like these little things that I didn't know that she was doing just kind of like hooked me in, right? Like, here, I need help making my molds. Will you come help me on a Saturday? Like, you want me to come help you? Like, okay,
Yeah.
And I understand all of that now, 20 plus years later, I understand what she was doing. And I try to pay that forward as best I can. But it was really that it was the process and her that just like sucked me in.
Good.
Yeah. First semester sophomore year was beginning Foundry, so that was bronze and aluminum.
Okay.
And then second semester sophomore year was advanced Foundry and iron casting, right? So they had a dedicated iron casting class.
Wow.
Because they only poured once a year, right? We packed up everything and went up to Crabtree Farm, which is like 45 minutes north of the city. We couldn't pour on campus. So of course I'm gonna, I'm hooked. I'm in, right? So I signed up for both of those, and Carolyn said, So we're going to this conference, like, we're going to drive to New Jersey and we're going to go to this conference and blah blah blah. She's telling the whole class about it. And I'm going, oh, that's nice, like, have fun. And she's, no, 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 we are going to this conference, right? Like, meaning like you are coming with me.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So that was the third international conference
Okay.
at the Johnson Atelier in New Jersey, which would have been, I'm gonna date myself now, 98, maybe. Anyway, so we hadn't poured in the iron because our iron pour was towards the end of the semester, right? So we spent like all semester making molds for this iron pour. And but part of the preparation was not only like learning more about sand molds and all that kind of stuff. We had already learned shell, right? Ceramic shell, and investment.
Okay.
So part of the iron casting class was, Carolyn talking about
Mhm.
how the furnace worked and like what the tools all were and
Mhm.
mud mixes and like sort of prepping us like dry
Yes.
before we actually got
Yes.
there, right? Um and that was all fascinating. And I think that, that's when it all kind of started to make sense to me, was that there was all of this like practical knowledge. Like, I never liked that trope of the artist being this like flighty, like God is flowing through my fingertips bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah. I meet people that are like that though, that embody that and present as that. And that's great for them. For them.
It's great, but that's not me, right? Like, I'm just a gruff Bostonian.
Yeah.
So there was all this like I had already figured out in beginning foundry that there was all this chemistry involved that I was really interested in, like material science, right?
Mhm.
Again, like I was the nerd in high school that was too smart to go to art school. So like my AP chemistry is finally coming back into play, right?
Yeah.
I didn't even take the damn AP test. Iron casting amplified all of that, right? Like there's all this math and geometry and physics, and like you got to have your feet on the ground.
Yeah.
Anyway, so she's telling us about the furnace, and that's all really cool. And then she was saying that at the conference, there's this mini cupola contest, right? Which used to be a thing. They haven't done it at the international in a while,
Mhm.
but it used to be a thing. And and she's showing us pictures of all these like teeny tiny, it's kind of like
Yeah.
baby clothes, like I don't like children, but like
Yeah.
like everything in miniature is just so
I
cute.
mean, I'm not a big like toy collector or anything, but I can appreciate a good miniature cast iron stove. I have one.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So she's showing us these pictures of these, and describing this mini cupola contest, and then talking about the problems, that like the logistical problems of running a furnace that small,
Yeah.
and then looked at me and was like, you should build one. I was like, what? And again, I mean, in retrospect, I totally understand what she was doing. Like, I would do the same thing now, right?
Was she trying to give you something to be passionate about, or what can you verbalize like what that?
She acknowledged that I had this level of interest that may be rare, right?
Mhm.
And that I really needed something to like wrap my brain around besides the crazy,
Mhm.
right? Like, use your powers for good,
Yes.
right? And so yeah, and I think that she probably knew at that point that she had influence, because I would do anything she said,
Yeah.
because she was God,
Yeah.
or goddess, I should say. So she just like kind of flippantly was like, yeah, you should build one. I was like, okay.
So you did?
I did.
I have so many questions. Did she give you plans? Did you have to do like?
So she gave me the chapter from C.W. Amen that everybody references when they build a cupola, right? And kind of was like, here you go. Because she had other students too, right? And there was this other guy that was there named Ryan Lewis, who has been at the Art Institute for a very, really long time. He was the technician. For a while, he was replaced by Dan Matheson.
Okay.
Dan slept on my floor when he came to interview.
Okay.
So anyway, it's good to know people.
It is.
Yeah. So Ryan was more of a tech head
Mm-hmm.
than Carolyn was. Like Carolyn is such a prolific artist, and she's an amazing maker, and she knows the technical as well. I'm not going to discredit her on that one, but she's definitely not, she's not like me and like all in for the technical, right?
Mm-hmm.
So she kind of handed me this chapter from CW Amen, and then Ryan, I think, talked to me more about it. But so the one of the biggest problems that she described when she was talking about why these tiny furnaces don't work very well, and it makes perfect sense if you think about it, except that, bear in mind, I had never seen a full-size cupola or port iron, so I didn't actually know what I was talking about.
This is part of what's amazing me at this moment in the story is
Yeah, but Carolyn said to do it. So, I mean, cut to 20 years later, she said, I think we were going to pour for ISC in Chicago,
yeah.
and she invited me out to do some kind of wacko performance. And I was like, what do you want me to do? She's like, build me a furnace that spins. I was like, okay. So, nothing's changed really.
Yeah. And I have relationships like that with some of my mentors. It's like, and some of my friends, it's the ride or die mentality. Like yes.
So here's a good anecdote regarding that, right? So I guess it would have been the next international, which was also in New Jersey. So the fourth international was also in New Jersey at Johnson Atelier. And at that point I was in grad school. So I was hanging out with George Beasley.
Yeah.
So George and I are walking the grounds, and from like really far away, George hears this voice going, "Where's Beasley?" Right? And it's Julius Schmidt.
Uh-huh.
And so, George was one of Julius's first assistants, right? Grad students.
Right.
So George, who was like 60 at the time, right? 58, whatever, like hop to like an 18-year-old. I'm like, what do you need, Julius? What can I do? And I'm just going, oh, fuck. Like, once you're somebody's assistant, you're going to always somebody's assistant. Like, it doesn't matter. You can be George, who is the man, right? And Julius shows up, and like,
absolutely,
you do what you got to do.
It runs deep with our community in our family.
It does. Well, if you think about how much these people did for us.
Yes.
Right. Which again, like, I just, every day I try to pay forward in some way that, like, yeah, I went the last international in Scranton. George was having trouble getting a flight.
Mm-hmm.
He was coming from Scotland. And Judy called. George doesn't call. Judy, his wife, calls. And he's like, Marjee, George, like, you have to help. So I've been I graduated in 2004. So we're talking almost 20 years, right?
Yeah.
The path of least resistance was to have George fly here to Logan, to Boston, and just drive down with me. I was driving down anyway.
Yeah.
So you better believe that I showed up at Logan with coffee black with sugar, right? Because I know that's what the man is going to want.
Yeah. No, that's great. I mean, it's like I've been out of grad school for 10 years, so not as long as you were at the time, but I still send my professor a birthday card every year.
Oh, yeah. 100%. Yeah.
Just because, and that's just, it's in the same vein. It's just the little things that you can say, hey, thank you for all that knowledge. So you're building a tiny cupola.
What Carolyn said was the biggest issue with the tiny furnaces was air circulation, right? Because you still need that air blast to superheat the coke, right? That's how we get the temperature that we need.
Yes.
But with that teeny tiny diameter, it can't circulate properly, right? Like, it's just like blasting in and hitting a wall. So it chills those little raindrops coming down, right? So like, that's the biggest problem, as according to Carolyn in 1998, right?
Yes.
Okay. And of course, that was edict for me because I didn't know what the hell she was talking about.
You didn't know anything at that point. Yeah.
So, but she had some pictures of some other tiny furnaces, so I could get a sense of scale and volume, right? Like what size people were building these. And so my head said, well, take the same volume and make it a sphere, right? Instead of a cylinder, which gives you the largest diameter for the air to circulate.
Yeah.
And maybe that helps.
It's worth a shot.
I don't know. I mean, at the same time, I was like making tiny tools, and like I made this, to run this tiny furnace. And so like I was all proud of myself because I made this like tiny pair of tongs to remove the bot. And she was like, no, you don't need tongs. Like, that's how little I knew about what I was actually about to do.
We all start somewhere though.
Yeah. I made really cute little cons. So I made this little furnace. It's basically, it's like the size of a basketball, right? It's a perfect sphere. It has a hinged lid.
Okay.
And I brought it to this conference, and I didn't know that I was about to make a whole bunch of waves, but apparently I did. So, because in walks this 18-year-old girl,
Yeah.
and that was not a thing
Mm.
at that time. So,
And were you in New Jersey?
yes.
Yeah. Okay. So you weren't as much of a Yankee as if it had been like Alabama.
No, that's the next conference story, is when the Yankee went to Sloss.
Because I can relate to some of that too. Anyway, so we'll get there when we get there. But
Yeah.
still is shocking.
Yeah. So I make this little furnace. It's the first thing I ever cast in iron. So I actually made this little wax and dipped it in ceramic shell and took it to an industrial foundry out in Chicago, because we hadn't poured iron yet. Right.
Yes. Okay.
That was fun, hanging with the guys in the industrial foundry. They had this, like, bull ladle. And it's like, I have this little tiny mold, and they're like, dink,
What kind of a furnace were they running industrially?
induction.
Okay.
They had an induction furnace. Yeah.
Did you see the actual casting happen, or did you drop it off?
Oh yeah. No,
saw it?
they let me stay, which is shocking.
Yeah.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, they were great guys.
That's awesome. So you show up and it's cast. So the furnace is already cast iron.
So I cast the furnace in iron. I put some lining in there. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. It had a blower port. And it had a tap hole at the bottom, like right at the bottom of the sphere.
Okay.
And it was up on a stand, so you could just slide a mold under it and just like,
Okay.
right.
What kind of a blower were you using?
I think it was just a Kirby vacuum cleaner. I didn't even know.
Okay.
Right. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about the origin story, like, that's when it all kind of started. Is like, I walked onto the grounds at this conference, and I was really young, right? I was a sophomore. I was 18. I was young through high school. I graduated young. So therefore I started college young. So I was 18.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And extremely shy. I still am extremely shy. I'm not 18. And I walked into this world that I never could have imagined in my life, right? This, like, circus of furnaces and fire and mayhem, right?
Yeah.
And the biggest thing was that I walked into really understanding that I was a minority, right? Even though in other aspects of my life I am one, right? And I've been a misfit in everywhere I've ever gone. But that was the first time that I really felt it, right? When you're looking around and you are going, not a single person here looks like me, right?
Yeah.
Except Carolyn. So that's kind of when everything changed. But so I built this little furnace, and it's I saw an iron pour for the first time. That was great. And then there was the night of, or the day of, the mini cupola contest.
Yeah.
And it was me and, like, these 5 guys that could have been my grandfather, right? I'm pretty sure Ken Payne was one. I should know who the rest of the people were, but I was so out of my mind, like, terrified, that I don't remember.
I think everybody in the community can identify with that, though, because when I think back to my first loss, it was so overwhelming because there were so many people. But my professor Jimbo, like, knew everybody, and so I just, like, followed him around and, like, met all of these people, and then was overwhelmed. So I forgot, like, a lot of people. It wasn't until being in the community and meeting them again, or meeting them in a more meaningful way. Like, I mean, I think that that's normal. Everybody talks about that they don't remember everybody at the first.
Yeah, no, I agree, it's normal. And I've heard so many people say the same thing.
Yeah.
Except for the fact that I put myself up on stage.
You were on a stage? Well, you didn't know that when,
like, the whole conference, I didn't know what I was doing. So, like, the whole conference is watching this contest. And
oh my God.
I think I had a buzz cut. Like, I was not, whatever. And I ran this little, well, when I say I ran this little furnace, Carolyn ran this little furnace.
Yeah.
I stood there like poking some things,
Yeah.
and it pooped out some iron, and that was really cool. And apparently that was like a huge statement that I wasn't understanding that I was making. But like back then, like you didn't go up against the old guys back then,
Well, you
right?
didn't know.
No, I
Did
had no
Carolyn
idea.
know? Did
Oh
Carolyn
no,
know?
Carolyn knew. Well, absolutely. So
But she must
yeah,
have felt like you could handle it,
I
you know?
guess you'll have to ask me.
I will.
So I don't. The rest of that conference is a blur. I don't remember. Oh, Julius did his one man pour. That was really cool. Whatever. That doesn't matter. I genuinely I don't remember much of that conference. And then we went back to Chicago and had our iron pour like a couple weeks later up at Crabtree Farm.
Yes.
So that's the first time I really actually poured some iron. That was cool. That was when you really get to understand like the camaraderie and all that kind of stuff that everybody talks about, right?
Yeah.
Where all the alumni came back and it's just a big party. And for those people who don't know about the SAIC iron pour up at Crabtree Farm, like it was like a weekend thing because we had to pack up everything. Carolyn has talked about it a bunch. Anyway,
Okay.
it's a beautiful location up north on Lake Michigan. So anyway, so I had a real iron pour, and that was cool. And then the semester kind of ended, and Carolyn was teaching some like bronze casting workshop. I think it was another ISC thing, right? Like whatever.
Uh-huh.
And so I stayed. I was helping her with that, and again, like I, didn't talk to anybody, but so Kurt Deerhog and Butch Jack showed up for that. And they were out in the courtyard smoking. And Carolyn was like, why don't you go outside and talk to them? I was like,
Yeah. I get the same way when I see, especially, well, but did you have a preconceived notion of who they were, or they were just strangers?
I knew that they were at the conference, right? I mean, I think I probably recognized their names. Like I'm the person that like read the conference catalog. And so I would, like reference, like I would have recognized their names for sure. Right.
Okay.
But so she like booted me outside to go talk to Kurt and Butch. And I walked outside and kind of like sheepishly was, like, I don't know if you guys remember me, blah, blah, blah. And Butch Jack gets this huge smile on his face and goes, I remember you. You're the Cupola Girl. And gives me this huge hug. And like that solidified our relationship.
Yeah.
And then Kurt, I found out, was pouring in Rhode Island that summer.
Okay.
So I ended up doing that. And that's where I met a whole bunch of other people. But yeah, that was a big year.
So right after that, then you're pouring in Rhode Island in the summer.
Yeah. So I came home to Boston for the summer because I was done with the dorms.
Yeah, I can imagine after being an RA.
Done. So yeah, so I came home for the summer, and I think that that's probably how that all happened, because they must have said, what are you doing for the summer? I was like, oh, I'm going home to Boston. And there wasn't a lot of iron here in the Northeast in the late 90s. But so that's, I'm sure that's when Kurt was like, oh, I'm doing this like week-long thing in Rhode Island, you should come. So I went to that and met a whole bunch of people.
Yeah.
Obviously spent more time with Kurt, Coral, Lambert, Matt Toole. I'm sure there are tons more people that I'm forgetting. It was horrible and rainy, and we had a tent, but we kept having to like dig a ditch because the water was coming in, and we were making sand molds.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
So we were digging a moat, and then all the sand molds were up on pallets, and then we were baking our boots in the oven.
Oh my gosh.
Every night.
To dry them out. You're baking your boots.
To dry them out, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Jay Hooley was there because he was up on a table at one point singing drinking songs.
Of course, yeah. So you had a good time.
I was in awe of all of it. I sheared 2 bolts on Kurt's furnace because, like, again, like, I wasn't a tool user, right? Like, I was playing catch up here.
Okay.
Um, and so I asked, I think we were setting everything up, and I asked him what I could do, and he said, "Oh, go bolt the furnace down." And I was gonna do the best job ever because it was gonna be fucking tight.
Is this like that's the stack, putting the stack on the bottom of the furnace?
I think it was like putting the well on the table, like bolting the furnace to the table. Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
And so, I had my wrench and I had my socket and I just kept going and I just sheared the bolt right off. And if Kurt will bring it up, like to this day, he'll ask if I want to shear any bolts for him. But I didn't know.
Yeah.
And all of those things make me such a better teacher now because I don't take any of that for granted, right? Like I remember George, so George bolts all of his sand molds together, right? Instead of using strapping.
Mm-hmm.
Or like he doesn't like a yoke. He like literally bolts all the way through the mold.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember him saying like, you can't over tighten it because otherwise it's going to squeeze the middle open. So you just, just enough tension.
Yeah.
And I remember he made me like hold the wrenches and he put his hands on mine to like make me feel how tight to go. He didn't know about the bolt shearing incident, but
You will now, I guess.
he will now. Yeah.
But that was good. I mean, that's good teaching because you really can't assume anybody's background.
No, and it's
No.
really like if I had to say one of the hardest things to learn as an educator is to remember what people might not know, right? Like what I take for granted now,
Yeah.
or what's, like anything, right?
Yeah.
I had a really perceptive student when I first started teaching like 12 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Teach Foundry. So I was doing an angle grinder demo and I kept putting the tool down on its back, right? Because that's muscle memory for me.
Yes.
And I had a student go, you keep setting that tool down really specifically. Is there a reason? I was like, yes, there is.
Yeah, hell yeah, there is.
I didn't know that I needed to say that out loud, right? Like, yeah. Anyway, yeah. So poured with Kurt and all of them.
So that's the summer.
That was summer. Junior year was fairly uneventful. Carolyn was on sabbatical, so I hung out with Ryan, the tech. That was super cool.
Mm-hmm.
Poured some more. I just poured all the metal I could and learned how to maintain the equipment. Like that was, because I was hanging out with Ryan, like that was the fun thing to do, was be like ass end up in a crucible furnace, fixing something.
Yeah.
And then I think was that junior year that I built the first big furnace. So I was laughing to myself
Mm-hmm.
when I read your list of questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have you built a furnace? Yeah, I have. Couple.
I know. I mean, I just want to hear. I mean, so we can talk about this one. I know all the segments one, but I feel like that was when you were in grad school.
That was grad school. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll get to that one. But I mean, the questions are really just because I've found that some people I'm interested in interviewing are very humble and they don't know what to talk about. And I'm like, listen, if you've ever made a furnace, we can just talk about that one. That's it for an hour. We can talk about.
Oh my God. Why you didn't give me that option?
Well, you have it. We can just talk furnace the whole time.
All right. The rest of my life doesn't matter. Let ask me anything you want to know about a furnace.
Don't tempt me. But I do want to know how you bridged the gap from.
Can that be the after show? Ask me anything you want about a furnace.
Game time decision.
Yeah. So I started counting just for those who don't know the inside joke. So I know that I have built 12 furnaces. That includes the mini ones. But then I'm not counting all of the furnaces that I've been involved with building, which I think gets real close to 30.
On top of the
No, including the 12.
Okay.
And that doesn't count bronze, aluminum, kilns. Yeah.
So this is your first big furnace that you're building?
Yeah, that was not that big. It was I think it's a 9-inch ID, which is it's too
Oh
small.
yeah, that's not that big.
Um,
It's bigger than it's bigger than the basketball.
it's bigger than the last one. Yeah. But that was the Patrick quilt furnace. So I sent out 5 by 5 inch cast iron squares or sorry, wax squares
Okay.
to friends, family, old teachers, whatever,
Yeah.
not iron people,
Mhm.
and had them carve something in there for me and send it back. And I cast them all and welded them up. So it's like a patchwork quilt, and it's about that community building thing. Um, so that's the first kind of like, I don't know, art furnace, I guess,
Yeah.
whatever. Um, and that is why I went to Sloss for the first time.
To bring it or to
No, to speak on a panel.
Okay.
So, so that's where I really met a lot of people.
Oh yeah.
Um, so it must have been that junior year because I was building it. Anyway, so I think it must have been Matt Toole
Mhm.
invited me to speak on this panel because he knew about this project because he was making a square.
Yeah.
Um, the panel was called "The Furnace as Art" or something, and it was like him and George,
Mhm.
who I didn't know yet, but he's a god,
Mhm.
and then me. Like that's stupid. So,
In your opinion,
well, I mean, at this point, I'm 19 and I've at least seen an iron pour.
Mhm.
So I went down to Sloss by myself.
Oh, wow.
Mhm. Um, and that was a lot. And I spoke on this panel. And if you ever want to know how not to give a lecture, here's my story. Ready? This is what I tell the students.
Okay.
Anyone who's intimidated by speaking in public, ready?
Yes.
So, so I was talking about this patchwork furnace, and it wasn't done yet, right? I was still building it.
Mhm.
So I had a slide of the drawing, and I had a slide of like the waxes and whatever, and some of the individual cast squares. And I do mean slides, by the way, because I'm
Mhm.
that old,
I'm with
right?
you.
Yeah. Um, and and that was it. And I was just going to talk about the project for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So I start talking about it, and I'm terrified. And and I started showing pictures of the individual squares that people had carved, and I was getting too in depth on like, oh, so and so carved this square, and like, look, it has blah 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 blah. Like that doesn't matter, right? I what I should have said was, I'm just going to flip through these really quickly to show the range of results that I got, right? Some people use text, imagery,
Mhm.
carved in, built up, whatever, right?
Mhm.
So, just look at the range, right? And look how pretty, like imagine what it's going to look like when it's all welded up and is a furnace.
Yes.
Instead, what I chose to say was, I don't really want to talk about this right now. And then I froze and just started clicking slides.
Well, at least you were honest.
Right?
I mean,
Um,
honesty, I feel like in situations like that, honesty is relatable
yeah.
because people
So,
also are like, yeah, I also don't like
yeah,
speaking publicly. So,
yeah. I've gotten better, like now I'm comfortable enough with it now that I would have made fun of myself in the moment, but
mhm.
not 19-year-old me.
Mhm.
Um, but lesson learned to anyone
Mhm.
who's, afraid of making a mistake public speaking wise. Like I have spoken on a few panels since then.
Mhm.
Um, and so it's fine. Not
Yeah.
gonna
And sometimes vague and overarching is just fine.
yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that was the first time I went to Sloss, and I met I met a whole new bunch of people. Again, super shy, and didn't have Carolyn to hide behind.
Were there people there that you did know from Rhode Island?
Yes, there were people there that I knew from Rhode Island, and there were people there that I met like through those people. Like I think
Mhm.
that's the first time I met Noah,
Mhm.
and Allison.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it was a lot. It was awesome. It was, super cool. And Matt's doing some, whirl-o-matic, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but from there, I started to go. So Kurt poured in Rhode Island again the next summer, and I think I went to that too.
Okay.
And I just started to going to all these iron pours. So so Matt and Andrew Marsh were at SIUE's. That was
Mhm.
pretty close to Chicago.
Yeah.
Um, and I kept going to as many things as I could, um, because we were only pouring once a year in Chicago, right?
Yeah.
um, and learning from as many different people as I could, and kind of synthesizing all of that information, and saying, "Yep, like I like this, and that doesn't really make any sense for me, even
Mhm.
though it works for them." Um, and trying to wrap my head around this, craziness, because it's just sheer madness
It is. And magic, but madness
and
also.
magic, totally. So graduated from the Art Institute.
Mhm.
Senior year, a lot of the same stuff. Um, Took a year off, figured that if I got a cool job, I would work for a while. I didn't want to go straight to grad school.
Mhm.
Um, but didn't get a cool job, ended up just, doing stuff just to pay the bills. Um,
I know that.
and then the rumors started flying that George might retire in the not too distant future.
Okay.
Which ended up not he waited a while longer, but I had met him. I had worked with him, I guess, 2 or 3 times by then.
Mhm.
Um, and he had said, like, if, when you're ready, like, come on down kind of thing.
Yeah.
And, so again, I did the same thing I did the first time. I applied to one school and went there. Um,
All or nothing.
all or nothing. You'll appreciate this.
Yeah.
So I called my dad, um, saying, "You're gonna have to come visit me in Atlanta." And he was like, and his response, and I quote, was, "Why the hell would I want to do that?" Bostonian.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so went to grad school at Georgia State and hung out with George for 3 years. Built furnace number 3 and 4 and 5.
Like in a row or when you
I don't remember.
it might not even matter, but
It doesn't matter.
I'm trying to hone in on the things that do matter.
So for anybody that's listening, anybody who ever wants furnace advice, just find me, right? Like, I'm happy to talk to people about furnaces. Um, and we can talk about it too, but yeah, so I built the my first semester I built the Phoenix furnace.
Mhm.
And that, so I guess the thing that's important that I think that we kind of just glossed over, that's going to become really important right now,
Okay.
is that I was still this 5 foot tall girl, right? My body was not made for this.
Mhm.
I was the only woman on a pour field.
Yeah.
I was using equipment that was way too big for me wherever I went. Too big, too heavy, too tall. I couldn't find boots that fit. Like, there was a lot of that outsiderness kept coming up,
Mhm.
right? Um, and that got a little bit more prevalent in the South, only because it was just a different place. It was not at Georgia State. I have to give that program credit. But so I built this Phoenix furnace. It's 7 feet tall. It's shaped like a phoenix, right? Transformation through fire.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, and we were going to run it at the Christmas Iron Pour,
Uh-huh.
which, annual Georgia State.
Yes.
Um, so these guys came from somewhere, and I recruited them to help me set the furnace up,
Mhm.
because the Christmas Iron Pour used to be huge, right? Like, people would come from everywhere.
Oh yeah. I went to the in Athens,
UGA.
UGA, and there was people because I think UGA, I never went, but kids would go. I was always in Massachusetts, I think, at the time because I was home for Christmas with my parents, like you know, but they would talk about it. They would talk about going.
Yeah. And like what a treat to to go from, like the Lake Bluff Iron Pour was amazing at the Art Institute. It was so cool, right?
Yeah.
But so coming from that to be able to just walk outside to a furnace that's permanently set up with all the
Yeah.
equipment permanently set up with a coke and iron corral right next to you.
Yeah.
Like it was like I could go outside and pour iron whenever I wanted to. Literally. Like I could just say, "Hey George, we're going to light the furnace now."
Yeah.
Okay.
Instead of having to do all the packing up and transporting and setting up.
Yeah, I mean, we literally loaded the entire iron pour into a box truck and brought it,
Yeah.
an hour north of the city.
But in Georgia, right there.
It was outside. We just had a courtyard outside. It was amazing.
That's fantastic.
And so for someone like me who was really interested in building equipment, like that was kind of a dream, right?
Mhm.
So I built this Phoenix furnace, and these guys were like super nice and helped me set it up, and because it's 7 feet tall.
Yeah.
And we're shooting the shit afterwards, getting ready for and they're like, "Oh, you built this thing? Like, you just get here? Like, this is fucking awesome, blah, blah, blah." Like, they were super excited. And then they said, "Who's going to run it for you?"
Oh.
And I went, "Well, I am." And they're like, "No, seriously." I was like, That'd be me." Right. And so, so those types of comments started compounding. Right.
Yeah.
Um, and, don't lift that, you'll hurt your ovaries.
Oh, wow.
Right.
That's not what I expected when you started that, but that's shocking.
Not to mention blow out my back, right, which has happened, but, like, no.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of this was just because I was so young too, right? Like, it's not gender, right? It is, but it's not just gender. It was size, it was age, right? Like, I had these string of people walking by me going, "Do you know what you're doing? Do you know what you're doing? Do you know what you're doing?" And then somebody would go, "Oh, she's fine."
Yeah.
And then I'd be okay, right?
Yeah.
But I really started feeling like I didn't have a voice, like I couldn't speak for myself.
Mhm.
It was very strange.
Or like nobody would listen, maybe?
I think these certain people were listening,
Mhm.
right? But it was just this, like, I didn't. It was like it was yet again in my life. I'm a misfit, right?
Mhm.
Um. So that's kind of when my work all changed,
Okay.
right? Um. So I'm still a tool freak, and
Yeah.
I'm still a furnace builder,
Yeah.
and I'm still a technician, but now it's more about this, like, self-portraiture through this process. Um, I went to Scotland with George. Um, he's so affiliated with the Scottish Sculpture Workshop, right?
Okay.
So I went out there with him that first summer,
Mhm.
and we went to some industrial museum, and they had these. It was amazing, all these cool old furnaces and things.
Yeah.
But there was this image of a, kind of quintessential group of iron casters, black and white, from the turn of the last century.
Yeah.
And it was behind glass outside. And I was trying to take a picture of it,
Mhm.
and I kept getting my reflection in the glass. And it was bothering me that I couldn't take a picture of this picture.
Yeah.
And that was literally, it sounds really cheesy, but that was like this ding light bulb. Like, I do not fit in this history, right? I just don't. And so what am I going to do about it?
Okay.
Um, and that was the summer between the first and second year of grad school, when everything kind of took a right turn, and it really became this personal investigation into the history of iron casting, um, specifically pertaining to the history of women in the field of iron casting. And I'm not just talking about our history from 1960 on. I'm talking about the history, right?
Yes.
Um, and then how do I find a place for myself within this discipline that I don't belong in, right? For a lot of reasons, I do belong, but for a lot of other reasons, I really don't. Um, so I did a ton of research. I still am doing a ton of research. I still make self portraits.
Mhm.
Um, the first thing that I realized that I was already doing was building equipment, right? And again, it was kind of like this, it was like that mini cupola. Like I didn't know that what I was doing was so revolutionary.
Mhm.
I didn't think it was revolutionary. I saw a problem and I fixed the problem, right? I made pouring shanks that aligned with my shoulders so that I wasn't pouring out here.
Yes. I can relate to that.
But that hadn't been done. I mean, people build their own equipment. Everyone, I mean, that's why we all love iron is that we build our own equipment,
Yeah.
but it wasn't people with my body shape building that equipment. Um, and furnaces that I could actually see into, right?
Mhm.
Which I do believe actually made me a better furnace runner to have to feel around in there to not be able to see, but to be able to do it by feel.
Mhm.
So thanks for that, tall people. But yeah, so I started doing all of this research, and the moral of the story is that there is no history of women in iron casting. There is a history of exclusion, right?
Yeah.
It pops up every now and again, and I can give that's a completely different lecture that I'm happy to give um, another time.
Great. Yeah. We'll put you on the books for the future. Yeah, absolutely.
But basically, what I was finding was that nothing was written, right? Not only in the history, and when I say nothing, I don't mean actually nothing, very little.
Mhm.
And certainly nothing was written about our history, even though there was Women Fire and Iron conference that had happened. There were things happening, but
Yeah.
it wasn't written down. And so that's what my thesis became was to start writing down that history through the lens of my own experience because I can only speak for myself, right?
Absolutely.
So what my work has become, and it still is
Mhm.
sort of odd self-portraiture through the lens of iron casting.
Yeah.
Not necessarily always cast iron. I've done a lot of photography, it all, funny, kind of humorous things. Like I reproduced old photos of myself as a child.
Mhm.
Um, and so the moral of the story basically is that I grew up as a very young woman within the microcosm of the iron casting community, and it is all of who I am,
Mhm.
right? Everything I learned from that sense of otherness, which I have thoroughly researched from multiple vantage points, to a sense of perseverance, right? Your mold fails, there's no crying in baseball, just do it again, right?
Yep.
Technical mastery as a benchmark for self-worth, like that. So basically what I figured out pretty quickly was I just had to put my head down and work, and then I was going to be accepted, right? Like, what does this community actually accept, right? It accepts technical mastery
Yes.
and hard work.
Yes.
Well, I can do that, right? And that's what I've done. So, and I have never, nor will I ever do an all female pour because I don't believe in it,
Noted.
right? The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house,
Mhm.
to quote the immortal Audre Lorde.
Mhm. So you're in grad school, you're building furnaces, you get out of grad school
Mhm.
with a body of work that's self-portraiture and using mostly iron.
It's actually not a lot of cast iron.
Okay.
It's a lot of equipment, right?
Okay.
So a lot of fabricated steel, refractory, um, photography, like I said, some cast iron, found object kind of stuff. It sort of whatever the best way to describe what I was trying to do, right? Um, at the same time, I went to grad school to advance my skills, obviously, but I really wanted to work with George.
Yes.
And so I did multiple, I assisted him with multiple performance pieces, learned from his mastery of all of that. I made hundreds of molds for him.
Yeah.
And so, just that repetition of, mold after mold after mold, just, building that technical skill set. When I graduated, I worked that summer, I worked for Inferno Art Foundry.
Yeah.
They needed somebody temporary to make some sand molds, right? I knew I wasn't staying in Georgia longer than I had to. So temporary was good.
Yeah.
And then I left and I moved to Oregon, where my ex was going to grad school,
Mhm.
worked for a foundry out there. So I didn't ever intend to be an educator. I figured I was, I'm a techie nerd, so I just worked in foundries. Wherever I've moved, I found the local foundry and said, "You should hire me. Here's why." Right, and
Mhm.
that's how I get a job.
Uh-huh.
Um, so I worked for a foundry out there, bronze foundry,
Bronze Foundry.
ceramic shell.
Mhm.
Um, we were out of there in 2 years. She had a 2-year program.
Mhm.
And then it was Oregon. So I had been out of Massachusetts for 10 years at that point. It was Oregon that put me over the edge.
Yeah.
And I discovered that Bostonians really, really belong in Boston. And so I moved home.
Yeah.
Yep. Worked in a foundry.
It's funny, I hear a lot of, and it's Bostonians, but it's also I hear other people talk about, even with, I did an interview of Remy and he talked about his earlier life. He just needed to get away
Mhm,
from Louisiana and now he's back and he's couldn't be happier. And there is something about having to leave and then you really appreciate
for sure.
kind of what you grew up with. So,
Yeah.
so you're back. So you moved back.
So I moved back to Massachusetts. This is now like 2006.
Mhm.
Um, so I had been home, I think like that February, visiting my folks, and went to meet the owner of New England Sculpture Service, which is the local foundry here.
Mhm.
And basically was like, just want to introduce myself. I'm thinking about moving back to the area. It wouldn't be till the summer. But if I move back, like if you ever have any openings, keep me in mind, kind of thing.
Yes.
And at least I figured that like when I move back, I can be like, hey, remember me? Like just, show that interest.
Yeah.
Um, and he called out of the blue and said, "We have an opening in the wax department. You want a job? How fast can you be here?" I was like, "I need 2 weeks notice and a week to drive."
Yeah.
So, and so that's what I did. So I worked there. I quickly became the manager of operations for the shop.
Mhm.
Again, bronze casting foundry, ceramic shell. Everything from teeny tiny, like just above jewelry scale to monumental scale sculpture.
And this is for other artists?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we had probably 50 different projects going through at any given time. We had a staff of like 10 to 12 people full time. Um, and I worked there until they closed in 2015. They assumed that I would take over the business, and I didn't want to. I was teaching by that point, which we can go back to,
Okay.
um, but I really fell in love with teaching and kind of and I knew that if I bought the business, if I took over the business, it would be not only a full-time job, it would be a 80, 90 hour a week. Like I will not have time to run off and teach a class, right?
Yeah.
So I said no. And so they thought they were going to close. And then one of the guys ended up, who was my student
Mhm.
and then my employee, ended up buying the equipment and restarting the business. And so now I help him out.
Wow, that's full circle. That's amazing.
Yeah. So yeah, so multiple bronze foundries, professional wax worker, patineur, manager. Got a ton of business experience. I love a spreadsheet. I love a spreadsheet.
Did you color code it?
I love a spreadsheet.
And and I employ that now as I'm doing these interviews. So I guess we can tell the listeners. So I had the pleasure of working under Marjee. She was the chair of the 2000 and was it 2017 and 2019 National Conference of Contemporary Cast Iron Art and Practices at
I
Sloss.
think it was 15 and 17.
15 and 17. Okay.
Co-chair, always.
Co-chair. And so I was on the exhibitions committee under you and Andrew Marsh for
17.
2017. Yeah.
Mhm.
And so that's really when we met.
Mhm.
And I learned about color coded spreadsheets and I use them in the scheduling of this and who's got there. Yeah. So I should not talk about that behind the scenes stuff as much, but
Love it.
that's where I learned it from, the Google Sheets and anyways, moving on. So how did the teaching, was it mass art first or did you start somewhere else? How did that come about?
Yes. So I taught at like some community art centers along the way, like, like a welding for adults kind of thing,
Yeah,
which is fun. But never really pursued the teaching job meat market, right? Didn't have any desire to do that. So I got hooked up with Mass Art because the guy teaching Foundry at the time, whose name is Matthew Hinsman, brought his class for a tour of my shop of New England Sculpture,
okay, yeah.
right? Foundry tour. And so I was giving this tour, right? Because I'm the manager of the shop, and chatting with the students. And, and I'm kind of goofy and, like, so we were having fun. And then I think somebody said like, "Oh, what do you make?" And I said, "Oh, if I make anything," because like this whole talk about making art, like I don't make a lot of art anymore. I make some stuff if I feel like it. Um, but I said, "Oh, I do this, wacko cast iron stuff," because I didn't know that Mass Art even had iron. And they said, "Oh, we're having an iron pour in a few weeks. Like, would you come help us?" And I was like, "Sure."
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. And and they said, "Do you have a furnace?" And I was like, "A couple," like, again, sort of like your question, like, "Yeah, I have a
Oh,
furnace."
this whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and for anybody who cares, you don't need 12 furnaces in your life, right? Like, just build one. Like, I just build weird furnaces, so that's why there are so many, right? And then Carolyn calls and says, "Build me a spinning furnace." So you have to do that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I went to help them out with their iron pour. Oh Lord. There's some good stories.
Okay.
And then shortly thereafter, Matthew, who was the like department head or whatever, said, "Do you want to teach a foundry class?" I was like, "Okay, sure, sounds good." I didn't know anything of what I was doing, but that's how it started. So that would have been like, I'm gonna go with like 2008, maybe I started.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, and those first students deserve an apology.
That's one way to put it.
You know, but really enjoy it. Really find a lot of value in it. I feel like I have the benefit of having two amazing mentors in Carolyn and George that I can draw all of this knowledge from, that like all these things keep popping into my, like, "Oh, that's why they did that. I get it now." So now I teach foundry and iron casting. We developed an iron casting class, and some other sculpture classes, if, when, whatever. And we kind of transformed the iron program. The iron program before me they were all kind of self-taught. It was a group of students that came together, um, and for what help they had, they did an amazing job. But from someone like me coming in, it was like horrifying.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, I think that's understandable because you had been kind of steeped in, you had started off in undergrad and, and then steeped in the traditions of iron casting at in Georgia. So
yeah,
then coming and seeing probably a lot of things that you could,
a lot.
help out with.
There were a few things, yeah. But I mean, they were getting iron out of a furnace, and like without the benefit of what I had, like that's pretty
Yeah,
pretty phenomenal, right?
absolutely.
Um, but yeah, so most, if people listening know the Sloss national conference.
Mm-hmm.
They probably have seen my army of
Yes.
students.
Yeah, and we should plug them right now. So if you're listening or watching and you want to follow Marjee's, what did you call them? Crew? What did you call them?
But they're like an army.
They're Marjee's mass art iron core army. You would follow them at symbol mass MASSARTIRONCORE mass iron core.
No, CORPS.
CORPS. I'll
Corpse.
have it on the screen too, and I'll say it again at the end for the cheap seats. But so that's where you can follow her current students who are posting, and I follow them. They post wild, amazing stuff, and they're so like fresh and energized, and it's really nice because
They're so fun.
I don't get a lot of, I don't get that a lot in my day-to-day personal life. So to be able to like wind down at the end of the night and see what they're doing,
They're always doing something goofy. They're the best. They're the best kids.
it gives me a lot of joy.
They're awesome. Well, open invite from one mass hole to another. Like,
I know. We should coordinate something sometime when you're having it. I'll come up.
we pour twice a semester. Like, we're always, I mean, they work their asses off. So,
Oh, yeah.
great.
I mean, I always see them at Sloss
Yeah.
working their asses off.
Yeah.
And so the spinning cupola, did the students make one also? Or is that
No.
the one? So because I remember one at Sloss.
Yeah, we brought it like in an emergency because we were like short on performances. And so it was one of those, like, I'm going to throw this in the van, right? In case we need some filler. Cause it's a crowd pleaser. It's stupid. I mean, like, why build a furnace that spins, like it spins this way, right? With a tap hole about here.
But why not?
It's dumb. Like, don't do that.
It's already been done though. So
It has been done. I want to build one that spins the other way, that goes this way. So it like sprays.
So we're all the way up to kind of present day. I would like to hear a little bit more about either how you specifically use iron in your work or and I'm the same with you in that I have a full-time job and I now have a podcast. I don't know. So my actual artwork production isn't as fast as it was when I was in school. And I'm okay with that. But you're continuing to use iron.
Yeah. So, if I bother to make any art, I mean, so I still, I make art all day for other people, right? For client work, which is an amazing, it's an amazing way to develop your skill set, right? I mean, like, I call myself a technician because I am an expert, right?
Mm-hmm.
um
Yes.
if it's castable, I have seen it, right? I have done it. um and that's awesome because then I can apply that to helping the students and to anything that I might want to make. But yeah, I mean, if I cast any iron for myself, it may be a piece of art. It may be something functional, right? I just made a brand for my nonprofit to brand some leathers. Funny cast iron pans, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I really don't make a lot of work anymore. And it's not always iron, but it's about iron. Which I think is really interesting, right? And it's actually something that I assign my students sometimes in that iron casting class, is to make a piece that's iron but not iron. Like, if you make a piece about iron casting,
Yeah.
what does that mean? Like, it's kind of an interesting way of looking at it and really analyzing like why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah.
So, I build new tools all the time, right? I build furnaces all the time. I'm always adapting something, right? I alter safety gear because it doesn't fit my students. So I mean, and I do consider all of that my work.
It is. I mean, it is. I mean, because I think I feel comfortable telling you this, but I am considering this podcast, the podcast iron, part of my artistic practice. Like this is my art and hopefully part of my legacy or whatever I'm doing to contribute to the community. And
100%.
so yeah, I'm with you in that our art doesn't have to be cast elements fabricated into a sculpture, but I do like to hear. And so this is really interesting for me to hear.
I like the fact that I have access to casting anything I want whenever I want.
Mhm.
Um, but I don't often take advantage of that. I'm getting older. I'm getting more tired. My back hurts more. That
Mhm.
kind of stuff. And I really like it's far more gratifying for me to see the students excel at this point than, you know, dink away on some little personal thing. But I can and I do, right? The biggest personal project that I have going is that I founded a nonprofit.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, which again, similar to like your comment about this podcast, which I am 100% approving, right? That's my approved stamp
Thank you.
as a part of your professional practice. And maybe it's a nomenclature issue, right? Like it's not
Mm.
art, but
Mhm.
it is your professional practice, right?
Yeah.
So in 2019, I think it became official. I co-founded a nonprofit called Eutectic Arts. We are a registered 501c3 focused on educational and mental health based sculptural learning. So I engineered and built all of this custom equipment for aluminum casting because it's a lot easier to get bureaucrats to digest aluminum.
Yeah. I hear that. Yeah.
Yeah. And we go to schools and institutions focusing on the most underserved demographics, specifically mental health based programs, focusing on therapeutic values of trust, teamwork, positive risk taking, self awareness, empowerment, all of those things that I think we've all found in the metal casting process.
Yeah.
I know that that's what happened to me. And I know that I've watched it happen to my students over the years that like I have that kid that's sitting in the corner that, like I see it and it's like an out of body thing.
Yeah.
Um, and to watch that kid who sat in the corner and didn't talk to anybody become the leader of our student group and be doing, demos and running work days for the underclassmen,
Mhm.
and running student cupola at SLOSS, and alumni sitting on panels
Yeah.
and that maturation that happens through not only college and getting a little bit older, but there is something so fundamental about if you and I are going to pour metal together, if we're going to share a ladle, I have to trust you with my life,
Yeah.
right? And I have to trust myself that I'm not going to screw you over. And for a kid in a foster program, um, that's uh, that's an experience that may be completely formative, or it may just be a really good day, and I'm okay with either of those.
Yeah.
Um, so that's what my professional practice, in addition to teaching and continuing to make client work. I'm not at the shop as much as I used to be, but I go in and help with specialty things. Um, that's really what I'm focusing on now is how do I get this practice out of academia,
Mhm.
um, to students that will never be college bound, or to young people or adults that that may not have access to art school or to going to a conference or anything. Or maybe this actually is the doorway to going into some of those programs for someone, we don't know.
Yeah.
um, but I feel like I feel like the journey that I went on has made me so acutely aware of issues of diversity and inclusion and access that
Yeah.
this is sort of where I was supposed to end up.
And that's where you are now.
That's where I am now. Yeah. And when I'm not doing that, I sit at the beach
That sounds like a dream right now.
and I garden. I've turned into one of those old ladies that gardens. I talk about like weeds.
I mean, it's a dream.
I mean, life is not that bad. Yeah.
That's good. I'm really glad to hear that. Well, Marjee, thank you so much. I think we're going to wrap up the public version of this and then go over to the after show. And Marjee and I are going to talk about some super secret stuff like, let's see. So, I mean, I think that the first time I ever saw you and remembered you in a meaningful way was Sloss 2013.
Okay. Well, what did I do?
You were giving a presentation talking about your segmented
Oh,
furnace.
yeah. So that's like my all-time favorite presentation. It's called A Cylinder with Three Holes.
So I think that I remember being amazed and awe. I feel like it was in one of the like blower
Mhm.
rooms when we would still have, now there's that new beautiful,
Before the new fancy building.
yeah, there's a new great
Mhm.
beautiful fancy building with, but it used to be, and a lot of people listening will remember, it used to be like the exhibitions were in in like the blower rooms, and I
Yeah.
don't even remember all of the names of all of the different places. And so we're like in this really, like, there's lots of pipes, kind of all this stuff that is very industrial for the large industrial production that used to be there. And I'm just watching you, who, I mean, we don't look super alike, but we're both, I identified with you. And I was, at that point I was out of grad school, but I you know felt like a nobody at that
Mhm.
time. You know what I mean? And so it was really inspiring. And I was really inspired by how you took ownership of your limitations and were basically like, look, I'm going to build this. So I want to talk about that more, because what has happened though is I have forgotten.
And I'm grateful that you took that away. I mean, that's like the biggest thing that I can tell people, right? Is like no excuses, right? Like
Yeah.
own whatever your limit. Like we all have limitations, right?
Yeah.
And we all have strengths. So no excuses.
Oh, well, before we end up though, I do like to do a, if you want to talk about a hot on the horizon, but also the advice. I feel like the advice is the most important thing. But if you want to talk about any hot on the horizon from the casting class this semester or something that would be coming up.
Thankfully, I don't have a lot of things hot on the horizon. I'm very much looking forward to a calm summer here at the beach.
Good.
Because I go from 3 jobs to one over the summer, which is nice.
You know, having that could be your hot on the horizon.
Oh, it's yeah.
The hot on the horizon is beach and gardening.
I've already started gardening. Um, I don't know. I feel like I'm supposed to have some kind of sage wisdom because I've gotten to the point where my hair is a little gray. As far as advice for people, right, is what you're asking.
Yeah.
But I'm not that wise. Don't never buy white linens. That's a bad investment in our field. Wear sunscreen.
Yeah.
No. Okay, so if I'm being for real,
I mean, the white linens is a legitimate.
that's legitimate. Yeah, it's a really bad investment. Yeah. Um, so the best I guess I have a couple things in my head. So the best piece of advice that I ever received from Ms. Carolyn Ottmers was that you get as much out of a thing as you put into it, right? And I really truly believe that one, that like people will meet you where you're at. So if you don't care, they're not going to care, right? And if the more you put in, the more you're going to learn, the more you're going to take away, the more you're going to digest, all that kind of stuff. So I do believe in that one. Um I guess I would say don't take yourself too seriously, right? Um be confident in what you know, but be equally confident in what you don't know, right? It takes a lot of strength to be able to say, you know what, I don't know, but that's okay, and we're going to go figure it out. But like, I don't want some bullshit made up answer. Just say I don't know.
That's great advice. That's a great way. That's a great place to kind of end it here. And we'll go on over to the after show and talk about the segmented furnace. What did you say? 3 holes in
So
a.
that lecture, if it's the same lecture that I'm thinking, because I can picture us in like the blowing engine room.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
Yeah, it was called, the lecture as it stood was A Cylinder with Three Holes, right? Just demystifying what a cupola actually is.
So Marjee and I are going to go over to the after show and talk about that. But everybody who's listening and watching, thank you so much. Marjee, thank you for your time and for sharing your story with us. It was fantastic and inspiring. And I'm just honored that you felt like this was worth your time. So thank you.
I, thank you for doing this project again. It's exceptional.
Thank you. All right, guys, that's it for now. We'll see you later and goodbye. Thank you so much for tuning in. Marjee's devotion to our history and her work towards the demystification of iron casting processes is playing a major role in the growth and ongoing success of our community. Her passion and enthusiasm for cast iron art is evident and echoes through each of her students wherever they are and wherever they go. Marjee, your devotion and continued service to cast iron art, its history, and its community is inspirational to us all. Thank you for persevering through it all to pave the way for me and those like me who will come after. Your resilience has helped me find my place with less resistance. Thanks again for taking the time to have this conversation with me. I had a wicked good time. If you want to know more about Eutectic Arts, visit their website at www.eutecticarts.org, and that's spelled EUTECITCARTS.org. Also, as mentioned before, if you want to follow Marjee's current students on Instagram, you can find them at Mass Art Iron Corps, and that's spelled MASSARTIRONCORPS. And I highly recommend checking out what they're up to. And now for my shameless plug. If you like what I'm doing and are interested in supporting the podcast, go to our Patreon page, which is patreon.com/podcastiron. There you can choose a contribution level that fits within your budget. Patreon supporters at any level get access to the after show from each episode. And this is just an extra 15 to 20 minutes with the show's guests where we talk a little bit more candidly and share at least one more story. In this episode's after show, Marjee refreshes my memory of her A Cylinder and Three Holes presentation, among other topics of discussion. So for as low as $1 a month, you can support the show and get this extra content. Do you believe me when I say even $1 makes a difference? I'll admit I am fine personally paying for the online hosting of these interview files for your listening pleasure. I knew how much it was going to cost me each month when I started the podcast. But for those of you who have signed up to help fund the podcast Iron on Patreon, thank you for showing your love and support and for helping ease the financial burden on me. If you don't have it in your budget to support the podcast Iron on Patreon, I get it. If instead you could just share this podcast with someone you think would be interested in listening or watching, and I'll appreciate that just as much. Anything and everything helps, and for that I say thank you so much. If you want to get in touch with me, you can email me at thepodcastiron@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening and watching. I'm sending you all my love always, and I can't wait to share the next episode with you. I'll talk to you soon, and have a great day.